Hello again, this is Earl Silverman, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Rheumatology, welcoming you today to listen as I highlight a paper of particular interest from the October 2023 edition of the Journal of Rheumatology. Today, I'll be speaking with Dr. Stephen Katz and Carrie, who are the authors of a paper entitled Biological Sex Inequality in Rheumatology Waiting Times During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And I want to thank you both for taking the time to speak to me and the listeners. I just want to comment that this is a very interesting observation. Certainly wasn't one I expected to see a paper on, so let's begin. Okay.
Right.
So we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic affected access, but what led you to believe that there may be a biologic sex inequality in access to rheumatology care?
I think it was, as a lot of these things, you're in the right place at the right time. And we've been running our triage program for 12 or 13 years. And we've formally taken a look at a variety of metrics in the past. And we, as part of the program, trying to look at the analytics and are we achieving what we've always wanted to achieve with it has always been an important part of it. We were fortunate, if you will, that about 6 months before COVID started, our electronic medical record system was revamped, which also meant that the analytics package that we had available was also updated and revamped. And we were able to look at more different issues like gender and geography and all these sorts of things in much more detail than we were able to without kind of doing a kind of more manual pulls and that sort of thing in the past. And so between having access to data and then just seeing other papers, both as you've mentioned, in terms of just general access to care, but getting a sense that maybe there is a little bit of a difference that might be coming through. Certainly it's not something that we had overtly noticed, but seeing that happen other places kind of raised the question of, I wonder, is that something that we might be seeing here? And it turned out that we actually had the ability to be able to ask that question where we hadn't been able to do that in the past.
You want to add anything, Carrie?
That kind of sums it up.
Okay, so I didn't prepare you for this question, but just dawned on me. Why'd you use the word biological sex? And what brought it up? You just used the word gender, which, as we all know, are not equal.
Right, and I probably should use the term biological sex. And the reason why specific biological sex, because in our medical record, that is how it is recorded. Okay. Obviously, the issue is very broad and interesting, and we could have a long conversation around that these days as well. But you're right that I should use the term biological sex in terms.
I know, I just couldn't resist, but we can use them interchangeably. Okay. I'm okay with it. All right, and could you please then let us know how you did the study, when it was done, and who was studied in more detail?
For sure. So we looked at a time period, again, as I alluded to, with our EMR being upgraded. That happened November 2019. So we're able to look back starting at that time. And we looked at this point up until June 2022 with a shorter time frame than we would have liked, but from November to March, which, as we all recall, is when things changed dramatically with COVID, using kind of a pre-COVID time period, and then from that March time period onward as kind of a peri-COVID time period. We were able to bring forward de-identified referrals, kind of close to 13,000 over that time to rheumatology through our system, and be able to look at time from referral to time being seen, the urgency of the referral as assigned by a physician. And we have very much kind of a Gestalt-based system based on what the rheumatologist thinks is the diagnosis, but high recommendations based on that potential diagnosis of should the referral be deemed urgent, meaning ideally being seen within a few days to a week, versus semi-urgent rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, would be an example of that, where ideal, national guidelines would say within 6 weeks, and then routine non-inflammatory disease kind of beyond that. So we're able to pull that out and then look at things like biological sex, able to look at, pull out postal code data to be able to differentiate between, are they living in our, where our clinics are in Edmonton versus outside of the greater Edmonton area, and be able to kind of look at all those factors, and really all comers that were referred over that time.
Anything more? No, we're good. All right. And so then you did answer one of the questions. I did wonder how you picked your start date, and it was a very logical, practical start date.
It absolutely, it was based on what was available. I think, yeah. If the EMR had been around longer, we probably would have looked at an equivalent sort of time. Sure. Whenever we had peri-COVID to pre-COVID, but that just wasn't possible, and the data pull from our older system just would not have been available to the degree of data that we're able to pull from this one.
No, that was a good, as I said, when I read the paper, I was wondering, because usually most people will attempt to match for time, but logical reason. So then, what did you find in the pre and post and peri, not post, this was peri-COVID?
Yeah, well, what was not surprising is that the average wait times increased during the peri-COVID period. And that has been reported in previous studies where access to care has been shown to decrease during the peri-COVID time period. What was really interesting, though, is that in the pre-COVID period, sex and age were not predictors of wait times once you adjusted for triage status. And I think that's one of the strengths of the paper, is that we could actually adjust for that, because obviously the types of presentations that males and females, we're going to use biological sex terms, sure, present with is very different. And so their wait times could be different, but we were able to adjust for that. And in the pre-COVID period, that made no difference. Interestingly, in the peri-COVID period, once you adjusted for those potential confounders, we found that there was a significant difference in wait times experienced between females and males, and that difference was about 10 days. We also found that that difference was different by triage status. There's a bigger difference in the semi-urgents versus the routines. Or actually, let me get that, I said that wrong. The difference was bigger in the routines and smaller in the semi-urgents. So there was some effect modification seen with triage status. We also found that younger patients were waiting longer in our multivariate analysis. So younger patients were having to wait on average about 5 days longer per decade that they were younger. So those were some interesting observations.
But what do you remember what approximately the median age then was? Is, what there was, you said by decade. So are we talking median age of 40, 50, 60?
Let me just look
here. Do you remember?
The median age was about early 50s.
Oh, early 50s. Okay.
For men and 52 for women. Okay,
so it just gives people an idea of the potential changes as you get younger.
Yeah.
And I think you really addressed the next question about within the time, the differential of your urgencies. Address that really. And would you speculate on your findings? I mean, it's really interesting, including the younger. I assume you, and I think you said it, you did control for disease, which is, I guess, falls into the triage. So what your predicted diseases would be your priorities within the triage. So I imagine that was controlled for. But why do you think this would happen?
Yeah. So Steve and I have had some conversations about this. Even though what we looked at was biological sex, we don't believe that this is a biological difference, right? Because we've already adjusted for disease, and the way that appointments are booked are based purely on the triage status with no regard for someone's sex or gender. And so probably the sex difference is more a reflection of gender difference, and probably more a reflection of gender role differences and how that was affected by COVID. So there are some studies that have shown that, for example, women experience more job insecurity during COVID. So perhaps women during COVID had a harder time getting time off work in order to attend the first appointment they were offered. Other differences, studies have shown that women took on more of that burden of childcare during COVID, so during lockdowns, when kids couldn't go to school or daycares were shut down, women were more so tasked with the burden of watching their child at home. And so, again, that could have been a reason that they couldn't take that first appointment that they were offered and had to find better availability. That similar theory could apply for younger people as well. So seeing that difference in age, that older people seem to be able to get in sooner. It could be that younger people also had that childcare burden or maybe less flexibility at work. But again, we weren't actually able to assess any of these factors, but these are just some of the hypotheses that we came up with.
That's fascinating. Do you want to add anything, Steve?
No, I would agree. We certainly had lots of conversations around that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So were you able or will you be able to look at, you address the time of the visit and you imply that the triage time, the asking time of the appointment was the same. Were you able to actually prove that? So meaning, yeah.
Right. So exactly. And that's what I think we were actually just talking about this, that we need to look at. So if we offered an appointment for you tomorrow and equally anyone tomorrow, does that mean that person took it? Were we able to actually reach them when we wanted to reach them and all those sorts of things? And that would be a really interesting next step to really look into this why and to try to determine those little steps, which aren't covered in the data pool that we were able to get. But to add that to do that, but of course to do that, especially on a go forward basis, we probably really need to repeat this sort of study, especially now. So we have the pre and the peri-COVID, post-COVID. Does that difference still exist? And then we can really ask that question again of why, and to go into a little bit more detail of what might be happening.
Yeah, I think you got to. As usual, every study leads to more and more questions, which is the way, if it's a good study, that's what exactly it should do. So I think it's fascinating. Is there anything you want to add that maybe we haven't addressed?
No, I think that's really good. And I agree. Like there's lots of different directions now that we can take this. So it'll be exciting to see what we find next.
I hope you keep on doing this, and I hope we do not have another bad epidemic, but it would be the perfect control, but I'm not wishing it on us.
Well, but let's hope not.
But at least you will have some evidence, as unfortunately we know there's a spike in hospitalizations with the new variant. Maybe this will change. I mean, this is really fascinating stuff and really interesting. Great work. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to review the findings of the paper and at least speculate on the implications. And then we'll look to the future to get the answers. And to the viewers and listeners, I hope you please read the manuscript titled Biological Sex Inequality in Rheumatology, Wait Times During the COVID-19 Pandemic, and its accompanying editorial called Sex in the Time of COVID-19, which is by Dr. Mark Harris from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. Both of these papers are now available on our website at jroom.org, and we'll pin the October print edition of the journal. And I want to thank Drs. Steve Katz and Carrie E. for being great interviews. And I hope if there's any comments, people will address them to Twitter at jroom or by email, manuscripts at jroom. And I encourage everyone, including our guest, to join us next month when I will speak to the author or authors of an article particular interest from the November edition. Thank you.
Thank you.